Have you ever wondered if a ghost could sue for haunting rights? Or if a spirit could be held liable for its ethereal actions? It sounds like the plot of a supernatural thriller, yet these questions touch upon real legal quandaries that challenge our understanding of justice and the afterlife. Across these episodes, we delve into the deep, intricate legal landscapes that emerge when the spiritual world intersects with our legal systems. From haunted estates embroiled in property disputes to sacred rituals needing protection from the prying laws of the land, we explore how legal systems across the globe navigate the murky waters of cases that defy the boundaries of the physical world. I'm Elise, and today I'm here with Juliette and Omid, who will take you on an inquisitive and eerie experience in our first and second episodes of the series.
Hi everyone, I'm Juliette, and in our first episode today, we embark on a journey to define the indefinable. What does personhood mean for being that exists beyond our mortal realm? And how do legal systems address the rights, intent, and liability of spiritual entities? Why does any of this even matter?
Hi guys, I'm Omid. Let's start with the why. Historically, spiritual beliefs have been foundational to the development of legal systems and societal norms. Many ancient legal codes were directly influenced by religious doctrines, and spiritual leaders often held significant legal authority. For example, the Code of Hammurabi, who was emperor of Babylon, was one of the earliest written legal codes and was believed to be given to Hammurabi by the Mesopotamian sun god Shamash.
Okay, so basically, we see that as our societies evolved, the distinction between secular and spiritual laws became more pronounced, but the underlying impact of spiritual beliefs on legal principles and societal norms remained significant.
Well, yeah, spiritual beliefs shape societal norms and values, influencing behaviors, practices, and expectations. And when legal systems acknowledge spiritual entities, they validate the deeply held beliefs of various communities, fostering social cohesion and a respect for cultural diversity. But this acknowledgement can also lead to tensions, especially when it conflicts with secular values or the rights of other groups. So, for example, the protection of sacred sites can sometimes conflict with the development goals, leading to legal disputes that reflect broader societal debates about progress, conservation, and spiritual heritage.
Similarly, legal cases involving the rights to perform certain religious rituals contest the boundaries of freedom of religion, that of also public health and animal rights.
But where did this all come from? If we trace back the historical evolution of law around spiritual entities, don't worry, there is more history to come in later episodes. We can see that ancient civilizations often had deeply intertwined legal, religious, and spiritual systems, with spiritual entities playing significant roles within their legal frameworks. The treatment of spiritual entities within these systems reflects a time where the divine and the legal were not distinct realms, but part of a cohesive worldview.
So we've already mentioned ancient Mesopotamia, one of the earliest cradles of civilization where law and religion were deeply intertwined. So the Code of Hammurabi, which we just mentioned, is one of the oldest deciphered writings of significant length in the world. It dates all the way back to 1754 BC and is a prime example. This legal code was believed to have been given to King Hammurabi by the Mesopotamian sun god Shamash. And that means that these laws themselves were seen not merely as rules of human conduct, but they were seen as like a divine mandate, with spiritual entities playing a central role in their conception, but also the enforcement. And the gods were considered the ultimate enforcers of justice, with the king acting as their earthly representative. And then we have the Greeks, and they had a very complex relationship with their pantheon of gods, and this extended to their legal systems. So these were less directly codified into their laws compared to the Mesopotamian civilizations, but divine will and omens were often sought before making important legal decisions, especially in early Greek history.
Yes, so we see this with the concept of Themis, often associated with the goddess Themis, referred to divine law or order, and was a precursor to the development of human laws. Oaths sworn in the name of gods were a crucial aspect of Greek legal practice, binding individuals to their word under threat of divine retribution.
And this we can see in parts of Asia as well. So, for example, in ancient India, the Dharmashastra texts, particularly the Manusmriti, I'm so sorry for the pronunciation, laid down laws that were seen as divinely revealed. So dharma, a concept that encompasses duty, righteousness, and law, was considered to be of divine origin, with kings and judges acting as enforcers of dharma on earth. The legal system was a complex interplay of varna, so caste duties, individual rights, and cosmic order, with legal penalties and societal norms aimed at maintaining this dharma. And in ancient China, particularly during the Shang Dynasty between 1600 and 1046 BC, and the Zhou dynasty, which is between 1046 and 256 BC, we saw that these legal systems were already very deeply intertwined with spiritual beliefs. So we had the concept of the mandate of the heaven, and this was central because it meant that the right to rule was granted by the heavens based on the ruler's virtue and their ability to maintain order and harmony. This divine approval was not only a spiritual endorsement, but also a legal principle that legitimized the ruler's authority.
Now, if we then fast forward to the medieval period, European legal systems were heavily influenced by Christian theology and the pervasive belief in the supernatural. Laws and legal proceedings often reflected a world where divine and demonic forces were considered active participants in human affairs. Trials by ordeal, for instance, were common, based on the belief that God would intervene to reveal the truth. Similarly, witch trials, which became particularly widespread during the late medieval period, stay tuned for the next episode, were predicated on the accepted legal and theological notion that witches made pacts with the devil, committing heresy and causing harm through supernatural means.
And this is where a turning point kind of comes, no? So you have the Enlightenment emerging in the 17th and 18th centuries, championed reason, science, and individual rights, which challenged the traditional authority of the church and the monarchy.
Yeah, and with immediate examples of philosophers like John Locke, Voltaire, and Immanuel Kant, they argue for a society that's based on rational principles. So this is where knowledge was derived through empirical observation and critical thinking, rather than divine revelation or religious dogma. So Enlightenment thinkers argue for the inherent rights and dignity of the individual, laying the groundwork for modern human rights.
So it was this philosophical shift which influenced legal reforms, moving away from punitive measures based on supernatural beliefs like witchcraft trials towards a legal system that prioritized empirical evidence, due process, and the protection of individual liberties. So the Enlightenment essentially fostered a growing skepticism towards beliefs in the supernatural, including witchcraft, demonic possession, and trials by ordeal.
Yeah, and this skepticism was not only philosophical, but also legal, as lawmakers and jurists began to question the basis of laws and procedures that relied on supernatural explanations. So by the late 17th and early 18th centuries, witch trials and trials by ordeal had largely fallen out of favor in Europe, a direct result of the Enlightenment's influence. So that's where we see these principles like rationality, empiricism, etc., take precedence, and modern legal frameworks emphasizing these evidence-based procedures. Now here comes the question. What do you guys think? Can we reconcile the post-Enlightenment conceptions of law and reason with the rich tapestry of ideas drawn from ancient systems and all the various indigenous cultures and more modern interpretation of spiritual entities? So imagine, if you will, a world where the legal frameworks of tomorrow essentially draw upon the holistic and interconnected wisdom of the past.
Well, this allows us to reimagine a lot of modern legal concepts, right? So concepts lawyers and law students are probably all familiar with: personhood, rights, intent, and liability.
In the realm of the law, the concept of legal personhood is a very fascinating one. So it's the idea that an entity, regardless of whether it's human or not, can be recognized as a person in the eyes of the law. And this legal recognition allows the entity to participate in activities usually reserved for persons. So filing lawsuits, being subject to lawsuits, owning assets, signing contracts. And beyond individuals, this category can extend to non-human entities, so corporations, partnerships, etc. So these organizations are then granted the ability to act as independent entities, legally separate from the people who own, manage, and operate them.
So let's picture a scenario where spiritual entities are granted the same legal standing as corporations. This could mean sacred spirits holding property rights over ancient lands, or religious symbols protected under intellectual property laws. We can think about whether law should be as human-centric as it is now. And that takes us to the very question of, do we even accept the existence or possible existence of spiritual entities? That depends on various societal and cultural attitudes towards the supernatural and non-human entities.
The cornerstone of this discussion is the existential assumption. Do we need to prove the existence of spiritual entities to enter contracts with them? Or can the law evolve to recognize agreements based on the profound impacts these entities have on believers' lives? Now, this question invites us to reimagine the legal definition of personhood. It extends it to include entities recognized through faith, tradition, and the tangible effects they wield on the physical world. In a legal landscape where agreements with spiritual entities are possible, the nature of admissible evidence must be radically rethought. Traditional legal systems rely on tangible, empirical evidence, but in cases involving spiritual entities, evidence might need to include oral histories or traditions, or even documented miracles and phenomena, like apparitions or anything else that defies scientific explanation. Perhaps spiritual mediums would even be called to the witness stand. This does, however, allow for a more creative imagination of legal frameworks, with special tribunals, for example, specializing in spiritual matters, equipped with experts in theology, anthropology, metaphysics, and the spiritual world, alongside other legal professionals.
And if we think about contracts, these could look a lot more ceremonial. So, for example, formalizing agreements through ceremonies by engaging legal authorities as well as communities, maybe even invoking and honoring the presence of the spiritual entity. Importantly, however, we should consider the possibility of a certain legal agnosticism.
So, like crafting laws that do not require empirical evidence of an entity's existence, but instead focusing on the intentionality and effects of the agreement among the human parties involved.
Yes, because this principle recognizes that the belief in the existence and will of a spiritual entity can have tangible effects on people's actions and decisions. Therefore, the law would validate agreements based on the shared intentions and commitments of the parties involved, rather than on the provable existence of non-human entities. The law would therefore formally recognize that spiritual beliefs and entities can exert influence over communities and individuals, affecting their behavior and decisions. This acknowledgement doesn't equate to validating the objective reality of spiritual entities, but rather accepts the subjective reality and its implications for those who believe. And contracts and agreements that involve spiritual entities would be assessed and enforced based on their effects on the human parties involved.
Okay, so imagine a world where legal agreements could include a spiritual impact statement. So essentially, like the environmental ones that already exist, right? So focusing on the actions and beliefs tied to the entities. So such a setup prioritizes community welfare and spiritual heritage, using the actions taken to protect a sacred grove as evidence of fulfilling an agreement, rather than proving the existence of the spirit itself, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Yeah, exactly. And it gets even more interesting. So, say a community pledges to safeguard a forest spirit, creating a pact celebrated with ceremonies and legal documents. Or consider a company agreeing with a local community not to disturb sacred lands, focusing on commitment rather than the intangible. So these contracts are measured by adherence to the commitments, with experts in cultural anthropology and theology stepping in for mediation when dispute arises.
Well, honestly, the concept of spiritual entities as legal persons really pushes all the boundaries. I mean, it introduces a lot of layers of accountability. So imagine a spirit accused of causing harm. How do we even prove its intent or link it to the damage? This could lead us to rely on expert testimonies or even, advancements in technology that bridge the spiritual and the tangible. But, as far as ghost hunting tech goes, we might be waiting a little bit longer for something really groundbreaking.
Yeah. Well, this would probably be a good moment to also discuss damages.
Yeah, just a bit. I don't want to get too deep into it. And I mean, I can't really imagine this being much more different than in other contexts.
Okay, well, in cases where a spirit is deemed responsible for harm, reparations might take forms that are meaningful within the cultural and spiritual context, such as rituals to appease the spirit, ceremonies to restore harmony, or even investments in preserving the entity's cultural significance. The legal recognition of spirits might also prompt the development of new insurance products or financial instruments designed to cover damages attributed to spiritual entities. Property owners could invest in spiritual entity insurance policies, providing a practical solution for compensation in the event of damage.
So basically, recognizing spiritual entities within the legal framework presents a duality that's as promising as it's complex.
I guess at least. On one hand, it offers a revolutionary avenue to protect and preserve sacred practices, providing them a legal armor of sorts against external threats and commercial exploitation. On the other hand, it opens a Pandora's box of ethical and legal dilemmas, particularly concerning the commercialization of spiritual beliefs and the contentious disputes that may arise over the portrayal and interpretation of these entities.
All right, then, Nomi, tell us more about the acknowledgement of these entities, because I can imagine that by granting these entities legal standing, the law can prevent unauthorized use or desecration of the sacred lands, protect rituals from being patented, for example, and ensure that these practices are preserved for future generations to come.
Absolutely, Elise. This legal protection acts like a fortress, right? It's there to guard against development bulldozing over sacred traditions or businesses trying to cash in on them, making sure that the practices are treated with the respect they've always deserved. But then there's a flip side. Giving spiritual entities legal recognition could, weirdly enough, turn them into something you'd see in a commercial, stripping away the sacredness. Imagine seeing a revered spiritual symbol on a billboard, for instance, one for jeans or something. Just feels wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah. And that actually gets me thinking, if we go down this road, are we saying that spiritual entities get the same rights as people? And what kind of rights would they have? Are we talking about fitting them into the existing framework of human rights, or is this a whole new ballgame?
All right, let's break it down. First of all, respect and dignity kind of seem like a no-brainer, right? Just like human rights protect our dignity, we could see something similar for spiritual entities, making sure they're respected within their cultural and religious context. And then there's the non-exploitation part that we've already kind of talked about to stop these entities from ending up as like the next big thing in ads or movies and keeping their significance intact. And what about the right to worship or performing rituals? Well, I think that's pretty key, ensuring that these practices continue freely. Property rights are interesting too, especially when you think about lands, right? That the ones that are considered sacred by various cultures. But here's where it gets pretty tricky, balancing these rights without stepping on the toes of established human rights, like property or freedom of expression. And we're navigating a minefield of global beliefs and legal systems, trying to find a middle ground that respects the spiritual without diluting it in commercialism. I think it's a pretty tightrope to walk, but requiring a very, deep dive into the cultural essence of these entities and a solid commitment to maintaining their sanctity amid the hustle and the bustle of the marketplace.
It's fascinating because we've actually seen cases where the legal system had to grapple with the paranormal. There's been a handful of cases that really pushed the envelope on how we understand evidence, liability, and believe it or not, property rights when ghosts are part of the equation.
Right, like the famous Stambovsky versus Ackley case. I mean, some call it the Ghostbusters ruling. It's a classic.
Absolutely, it's my favorite. So it's all about this Victorian house in Nyack, New York, and the owner, Ellen Hackley, had been telling everyone about the friendly spirits sharing her home. And these weren't your horror movie ghosts, but more like Casper the Friendly Ghost vibes.
So this guy, Jeffrey Stambovsky, decides to buy a house. He's charmed by its looks and he's completely unaware of its otherworldly residents. He only finds out about the reputation of, it being haunted after he signs the paperwork and understandably freaks out. He wants out of the deal, arguing that Ackley should have told him about the ghosts. It was a significant detail that was left out.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. So, New York State Supreme Court, the Appellate Division, actually sides with Stambovsky. They ruled that Ackley can't go around saying her house is haunted for years and then not mention it when selling. The decision wasn't really about whether ghosts are real or not, but about the fairness in the transaction.
Yeah, the court's decision was surprisingly witty, filled with puns and humor, acknowledging how out of the ordinary this case was. They famously said, as a matter of law, the house is haunted. It wasn't about proving the existence of ghosts, but recognizing that the house's haunted reputation was a significant factor that should have been disclosed. And this case is a landmark because it illustrates that even something as intangible as a house's reputation for being haunted can have real legal implications.
It's a mind bender, isn't it? It challenges how we think about liability and disclosure and even the reality of non-physical phenomena in legal context. This case opens up a whole new world of legal considerations, proving that the law can adapt in the most unexpected ways.
That's really interesting. Moving on to another case that is equally captivating, the story of Anneliese Michel.
This story inspired multiple books and documentaries now. And wasn't it the 2005 film The Exorcism of Emily Rose inspired by this?
Yeah, it's very correct. Picture a young Bavarian woman, deeply entrenched in her Catholic faith, whose life takes a harrowing turn. At 16, she experiences a bunch of seizures and she's diagnosed as an epileptic. But her journey into darkness doesn't stop there. Despite medical interventions, Anneliese descends into a terrifying world of visions and voices. She's convinced she's in the clutches of demons.
Annaliese's tale is not just chilling, it's actually heartbreakingly complex. In 1975, after much deliberation, the Catholic Church sanctions an exorcism, and over 10 months, 67 sessions are conducted with Anneliese and her family firmly believing in her demonic possession. And despite all the exhaustive trials and rituals, her health deteriorates. Her refusal to eat, claiming demons prevent her, leads to her tragic demise from malnutrition and dehydration at just 23. Her death ignites a firestorm, culminating in a trial that casts a spotlight on exorcism practices, weaving through the intricate web of religion, law, and mental health. And the intent behind the actions of Anneliese, her family, and the exorcist is really central to understanding the case. Anneliese's own belief in her possession and her consent to undergo exorcism reflects an intent to seek relief through spiritual means, influenced by her deep religious convictions. But similarly, the intent of her parents and the priest was ostensibly to help Anneliese, believing that the exorcism was in her best interest and would save her soul.
Yeah. The case also delves into the complex issue of liability, especially in contexts where religious practices intersect with health and safety. The subsequent trial and conviction of the priest and Anneliese's parents for negligent homicides highlight the legal system's stance that their actions, or lack thereof, contributed to her death. And despite their intentions and belief in the religious necessity of their actions, they were held liable for prioritizing spiritual intervention over medical treatment, leading to Anneliese's preventable death.
Okay, then, let's close today's episode on this very fascinating and heavy story. The questions we've raised today has challenged us to reconsider the boundaries of law, ethics, and spirituality. They've compelled us to imagine a future where legal systems are not only informed by empirical evidence and rational thought, but also sensitive to the spiritual and cultural dimensions of human existence. And this exploration really encourages a broader understanding of justice, one that embraces diversity, respects traditions, and acknowledges the unseen forces that shape our world.
Yeah, thank you for tuning in. Let's continue to expand our minds and challenge our perceptions as we seek to understand the unseen and the unexplained, not just as matters of belief, but as integral elements of our legal and societal framework. So until next time, and keep pondering the mysteries that lie at the hearts of law, life, and the afterlife.
All right, guys, until next episode. See you then.